Cassie Dumlin with Burns & McDonnell Engineering on behalf of Pattern Energy, 1431 Opus Place, Downers Road, Illinois. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to give a general overview of the decommissioning studies that we do for wind farms. I'm an environmental engineer with Burns & McDonnell on our demolition and decommissioning team, where we've taken down and provided this expertise for a variety of structures, including houses, industrial buildings, and power plants, as well as wind farms. Burns & McDonnell, our team, has done about over 100 of these wind farm demolition and decommissioning studies, several of which have been in Illinois. These decommissioning studies essentially provide an estimate and the procedures for the project owner when they remove all the facilities at the end of commercial operation and return the project to pre-construction conditions. This includes the removal of all above grade facilities. These are your wind turbines, the substations, transmission lines, and then also below grade facilities, your cabling and foundations to a depth of 5 feet below ground surface. Anything below that 5 foot threshold is abandoned and placed. And then all of which is conducted to comply with health and safety regulations and standards. As we prepare these demolition and decommissioning studies, the general decommissioning processes are modeled that all debris, concrete, and blades, which are typically comprised of composite material, are properly disposed of in an approved landfill. All salvageable materials, your steel, aluminum, copper, are sold as scrap to offset these decommissioning costs. Turbines are typically removed through the use of cranes. This is a safe and effective manner, and it's done so that way the decommissioning is conducted in a controlled state. At the end of which, all disturbed areas are then returned to the pre-development conditions. Our model is a proprietary spreadsheet that includes labor, equipment, rentals, hauling, disposal, and scrap pricing. The turbine inputs are based on discussions and specs from the manufacturer. We provide a balance of plan, which includes all the facilities a part of these wind farms, and these inputs come from discussions with demolition contractors and various resources, including RS-Means, Heavy Construction Cost Index, and the American Metals Market, and local companies, such as landfills. We use all of these to provide representative prices that best describe the project. Our final product is a decommissioning cost estimate that includes the cost to remove all above grade structures and then all below grade structures to that 5 foot threshold that we discussed earlier. In addition, at the end of all the removal, we return that site to pre-construction conditions and also include owner indirect costs, which is engineering, demo oversight, things of that nature, and then a contingency. The final decommissioning estimate is your total cost minus the recovered salvage value. This value is secured through financial assurances with the project owner. Again, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you. Ivan and Brewer, is it?
My name is Ian Brewer. I'm with Burns & McDonnell. I'm a sound specialist. Address 200 West Adams, Chicago, Illinois. I'm here tonight with Pattern Energy. My role in the project will be to...
Sir, I don't mean to interrupt. Could we just get the name? He said it so fast that I just couldn't hear him.
Ian Brew, B-R-E-W-E.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Absolutely. My role in this project will be to conduct a sound study for Pattern Energy to look at what are the noise impacts on the residents in the area. I am an elected member of the Acoustical Society of America and a board certified member of INCE, the Institute of Noise Control Engineering. I've been conducting noise studies for power and energy and a variety of other applications throughout the U.S. for over 15, 18 years now. So the ordinance that's proposed refers back to the Illinois Pollution Control Board, Illinois ordinance. There are a lot of benefits and positive aspects of this ordinance that I'd like to highlight. First of all, it's a frequency-based ordinance. That means that each octave band, from 31 hertz, which is very low, to 8,000 hertz, the high end of human hearing, are all limited individually. They're not summed together with a correction for human hearing to an overall DBA level, which is what you see a lot of ordinances across the U.S. referring to. So each individual frequency has its own limit. And the project must meet that limit for each individual frequency. So if a wind turbine is set back such that it meets right at 1,000 hertz, and all the other ones are lower, then that's the way it needs to be. The next aspect of the ordinance is that it's based on the loudest hour, the worst case 1 hour number during the nighttime hours. There is also daytime levels that are less restrictive, but for the nighttime hours, they're more restrictive. This 1 hour average is a big differentiator from some of the other numbers you've heard out there. Some of the numbers that we've heard are 40 dBA. Again, that's all the frequencies mixed together. And those are taken over a 1 year average. So that means the times when the turbine does not operate helps reduce that average. Here in Illinois, we look at it the loudest hour during the nighttime hours. So if whatever the loudest output of that turbine is what we're analyzing. For example, if a turbine operates at a home at a level of 44 dBA, and it's off 50% of the time, over a given year, that yearly average is going to drop down to 41 dBA. So you can see that the loudest hour may actually be more restrictive than an hour or a yearly average in certain conditions. So how do we demonstrate this prior to construction of the facility? We'll conduct computer modeling using the sound levels from the manufacturer given at the highest wind speed of operation. These are the loudest levels that they will experience. These levels will be then projected at the home, at the various homes. So we can incorporate the loudest. It also looks at the worst case, which is when the home is downstream. So it artificially assumes that that all the receivers are always downstream of the noise source, which is not really a possible situation. It also includes the presence of a moderate temperature inversion, which is a worst case scenario. So really we're going to be modeling for that worst case 1 hour scenario. Low frequency noise is also often discussed when we come into wind farms, and those typically range down to 20 hertz. Within the Illinois ordinance, the 31 hertz octave band captures that 20 hertz and lower, down to 20 hertz. And so that effectively limits that sound level down at those low frequencies. Infrared sound that you sometimes hear people talk about is also an aspect of the project. Typically, what we see at these setbacks are that the infrasound levels are far less than the established levels of perception for most people. So in conclusion, once again, the Illinois Pollution Control Board limits noise on a frequency basis for daytime and nighttime hours, the nighttime being less restrictive. These limits can be more difficult to achieve than a yearly average of, for example, a 40 dBA yearly average. And the ordinance defines the applicant must show compliance before the project begins. So thank you very much for having me tonight.
Thank you. Is that Jeremy? Daryl? You confirm and tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Darnell, and I'm the GCMS superintendent. This is the fourth meeting I've been to on this issue at 3 different levels of the process. The best word I can term each of those experiences is redundant. There's been an enormous amount of information provided on both sides, and it's been consistently repeated. People are very passionate on both sides. I have friends sitting on literally and figuratively both sides of the aisle out there, and that's a very challenging thing. Like my cohort, the other superintendent that spoke tonight, I'm not going to talk about money at this point, but I am going to use a point of reference that hits very close to home to be a little bit sympathetic to the guys sitting up here that have to make a decision. I made a joke at the last meeting that I have to call snow days. In fact, Kip Rutledge, one of my resources, standing in the back of the room. Sorry, Kip. But when I have to call a snow day for our school district, I have to make a decision based on the information I have at the time that some people aren't going to like. And some people are going to knowingly think that I am knowingly putting their children in harm's way. That sucks. For those of you that know me in the room, you know how passionate I am about kids. Hopefully you know how passionate I've become about GCMS School District in Gibson City because I choose to live here. I have never once made a decision on a snow day based on the fact that I would put a kid in harm's way. Knock on wood, we've never had a student injured on a snow day or a non-snow day where we maybe shouldn't have. I can't say the same about days where it's sunny and clear. So when I make decisions on things like that, I don't take them lightly. I've had parents call me and tell me that I knowingly put their kids in harm's way. I've watched people in these proceedings do that to these guys. These are voluntary servants and servant leaders in positions that other people don't want to take. So regardless of what the outcome is, I hope you respect the fact that they're going to make a decision that they think is best and it's not personal. I hope people will do that for me in my position. I hope you do it for them.
Thank you. You need to record that and play it back later, I think. Dennis?
My name is Dennis Fisher, and I live at 105 North Church Street in Gibson City. And to start with, I've heard a lot of argument pro and con about wind energy, and I haven't yet heard any of the residents say that they're against wind energy. And so I think we need to keep that in mind also. When I got involved in this, I was totally neutral. Whether we had a wind farm or didn't have a wind farm made no difference to me. I can understand the county wanting to find ways to alleviate expenses that they have. And the more and more that I research, the harder it is for me to accept a lot of the things that I hear that are pro wind turbine and wind farm. I have an article here from, it's an article from Iowa about how the Iowa residents, what the common complaints are. I'm not going to go into the article. I'm not going to ask you to read it. Their complaints are very similar to the concerns that we hear and listen to with the people that live out in the rural districts that are going to be affected by these turbines day and night. Various things we've all heard from both sides, as Mr. Darnell had said. I've got an article from Paris, France, and it's an article about how milk cows have stopped milking because of the setback or lack of setback in the area where the milk farm is. I have an article here. It's from the Annals of Animal Science. And I call these articles, but they're reviews of research by experts. I know we had a gentleman earlier that said he's an expert, and he explained why, because of his education and experience. So I presume that these researchers have education and experience. But from the Annals of Science, it describes how it affects the quality of meat in hogs, especially in the loins, and I forget what the second area was, but it affects the quality of the meat. From the Journal of Wildlife Diseases, and this is published in Lawrence, Kansas, a little closer to home, it talks about stress in badgers and wildlife from the wind turbines, from the noise, from the vibrations, and from the World Council for Nature. And this is marked in Denmark. It was a study of minks near a wind farm. It was a mink farm. And it explained how there were 1,600 minks born prematurely or miscarriage or deformed, and due to the wind farms coming in. Over by Carlock, just west of Bloomington, Illinois, there's a wind farm over there, and I happened to speak to a gentleman who resided out in the rural areas of this, and he explained to me how he came to county board meeting after county board meeting and voiced his concerns about the setback distances and about what the effects might be on his property. He wanted to, he's got 5 acres over there, he wanted to retire someday on his property. And he told me that as it turned out, there are wind turbines on 3 sides of his home, his 5 acres. And he said the noise, the constant noise is deafening. And you don't understand, you don't realize how deafening it is until one day you walk out and they've turned all those turbines off. And you hear how peaceful it is out on the countryside, which was his main reason for moving out there. And it's just my guess that those that are pushing toward the clean energy concept are probably the same people that that try to sell us on the idea of man-made global warming, and that might be true. It might be us doing it. And after listening to issues on both sides, arguments on both sides, I wonder what it's doing to the environment. And lo and behold, they came up with a research that said that the earthworms around these turbines have disappeared. And I'm not the one doing the research, I'm just sharing what I've found. My question, with regards to turbines that are twice the size of any around central Illinois that I know of, at 650 feet or whatever these new machines are going to be, do we in Ford County really want to be the testing ground, the proving ground, to find out what these machines do and don't do? I don't know of any research, I haven't found any research about these 650 footers anywhere in the country so far. I've seen some of the 450 and the ones around here around 300 feet. And I'm just not sure that we want our neighbors to be guinea pigs. I heard one school superintendent at one of the meetings prior to tonight address the hearing and state that we are a society of a majority rules. But I tend to differ, because if you look at various aspects of our society and our life, you'll find that it is different. Look back to the March primary, where we went to the polls, and only 22% of registered voters turned out to vote. That's hardly a majority that elects our officials, okay, and gives them the responsibility and the authority to determine how we're going to live and what kind of regulations we're going to live on. Now, for the sake of money, we have several landowners, and as a community in Ford County, and the, I think, 15,000 or so people who live here, the number of farmers that have been listed to lease their land is in a minority, because most of us live in town. And then we have another minority, the number of residents who live out there asking for safe setbacks. And my question is, are we willing to compromise their safety for a select few? And the select few being those farmers that are already pre-selected, is my understanding, and already contracted. And by setting these wind turbines back farther, a safer distance, I see the biggest problem and the biggest rub is that the wind companies are going to have to go back out and renegotiate contracts with other people, perhaps, and start over, back to square one for them. But I don't think it should be about money. I'm a precinct committeeman, and like the county board, and you gentlemen being an arm of the county board, and yes, you are volunteers, but we're sworn to uphold the Constitution of Illinois and the Constitution of the United States of America. And in both constitutions, it reads, we provide for health, safety, and welfare, and we are to ensure domestic tranquility. And if the people living out on their properties, out in the rural areas, can't expect our government to protect them, then I think we have a problem. And so all I ask of you as an appeals board is not to favor one group over another, not to make judgment merely out of financial gain for the county or anyone else, at least not at the expense of the safety of the residents. And I appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you much.
Jim Madison?
James Madison, M-A-D-S-O-N, and work as a project developer for Pattern Development and address of Pier 1 Bay 3, San Francisco, California. So wanted to start out, I think, similar to a few folks in thanking the Zoning Board of Appeals, as well as an additional thank you to the Zoning Subcommittee, who I think sometimes gets a little overlooked for the 10 months of time that were put into, I kind of lost count, but probably about a dozen or so meetings, hearing a lot of the same information we're hearing here, maybe even more, different studies, different facts, different interpretations, all of these sorts of things, and trying to weigh that all out. Take a look at that 2009 ordinance that is still in place right now, and then come up with a new version that they felt was appropriate to move forward with the development in the county. So one thing to highlight, and for the ZBA members, this was the document that I had, wind turbine siting considerations that I had given you previously. And a couple of things to be said, and I'll flip to the next slide in a second, but there are actually quite a few changes, many changes to the existing ordinance that were recommended that were part by deliberation by the zoning subcommittee, part by deliberation with folks, as we've kind of been calling it, on both sides of the aisle, different opinions, and I think things that actually ended up, maybe somewhat surprisingly to folks, ended up agreeing on, and things that needed to be strengthened, things like dispute resolution and remedies. That was one of the problems, and I think is one of the reasons why we're all here this evening, and why the moratorium was put in place now a year ago. So that concept of dispute resolution and remedies is a powerful one, because it allows for being able to implement an ordinance that has reasonable, safe setbacks, but for folks that do feel, hey, I feel like I am being impacted by this wind farm more than I should be, or more than is allowed by the ordinance, there is now a formal way to address that with the board, and the wind farms have to comply with those things and be able to prove those things, and if they can't, which I personally believe that the wind farms, the ordinance that gets passed, we should have to live to that and comply with that and be able to show that we are compliant with that. And if not, there should be penalties and there should be remedies, and that's one of the things that was addressed by the zoning subcommittee, and I think a powerful way to address some of these issues and strike that balance between safety and development, because it's not, those two things are not mutually exclusive. You can have both, and that's been shown across the country with close to 60,000 operating turbines in the United States, 350,000 turbines worldwide. It is a possibility for communities to coexist with wind development. So wanted to touch on a few things and hopefully try to avoid some of the more emotional topics and try to stick to some more facts, maybe some insights from someone who's worked in the wind industry, not to make a joke, but since I had hair, so about 18 years ago, and somebody who's seen quite a bit, a lot of different roles that I've had in this industry and interacting with a lot of different communities and seen a lot of these issues come up. So, we've talked individually about one setback or another setback, but there's a whole slew of setbacks that end up getting brought into play when you actually look for a final siting decision. Shadow flicker is definitely one of them. Sound is one of them. Property line setbacks, as in the previous ordinance and this ordinance are included. Property line setbacks are included. Residence setbacks, sound, all of these topics all meld together. And sometimes it looks like kind of joke, and I say once you look at a map of, say, the Kelly Creek Wind Farm or some of the other wind farms in the region, because of the nature of the ordinances, the nature of how you lay out wind turbines, the nature of the parcel sizes and orientations, these sorts of things, it kind of looks like a shotgun pattern. It looks like it's totally random and someone's throwing darts, but it's a highly scientific, careful, researched way based on data and a lot of experience working with the manufacturers to site these turbines in a way that works for the wind farm, but also works for the community at large as well. So just a couple of items to try and touch on. I don't know, gentlemen, if you have these sets of slides in front, but tried to put together a table that shows some of the primary topics, some of which I think have been covered more in depth, some less, but where the 2009 ordinance was, where the 2018 zoning subcommittee landed, and then just a few things that Pattern would recommend and suggest as for consideration by the ZBA and the full county board. So I won't go into all of these different ones, but for example, the property line setback previously was 1.0 times hub height. The property line,
What, I'm sorry.
1.0 times hub height.
Thank you.
Yes. And now has been modified, suggested modification by the zoning subcommittee of 1.25 times tip height. So the difference between hub, the center of the rotor, versus the tip, and then adding the 1.0 to 1.25, depending on the turbine size, this can double the property line setback that was in the previous ordinance as to the one that the zoning subcommittee has passed. And then the recommendation on, tower tip height, I'll hit the primary structure setback we talked about, which has been one of the ones discussed, I think, in depth this evening, but zoning subcommittee at 2,250 feet or 4 times tip height. The suggested request, based on a lot of the different information that's already been proposed, and it's getting very late, but 1,500 feet or 3 times tip height becomes a nice measure and a metric in combination with property line setbacks, road setbacks, sound, all of these other pieces that are separate. But the 1,500 feet or 3 times tip height becomes a primary structure setback that is worked by and large across the country with great success. One item I want to mention was on the permit fee. I don't think this really got brought up, but that's listed under the special use permit to clarify that, which I think was I won't put words in anybody's mouth, but the intention of the zoning subcommittee to make that a construction permit or a building permit fee rather than a special use permit application fee, because the special use permit application fee is actually already addressed in the main ordinance outside of the Appendix A that has been the one being, appendix being discussed. One more, so I told myself I was going to be brief, and I'll try to stick to that. So one thing I wanted to talk about a bit was a little more on technology. We talked about the 500 feet, 500-foot tip height limit that's in the existing ordinance, kind of going with the 2009 ordinance, and this concept of a 650-foot tip height going forward. So a few things to point out on that, and I'll try to touch on a few things, is this is the trend for wind turbine technology is a combination of 2 things. One is moving the rotor, so all 3 blades in the hub together, higher above ground where wind speeds are stronger, and you're able to be more efficient and be more competitive with a wind farm that you develop and build. Because at the end of the day, we are competing with other wind farms in the county as well, and so we want to have the lowest cost of energy that we're producing, which is getting very, very low, both with and without the production tax credit. And that's certainly been proven in a lot of recent studies as well. But both the rotor is actually trending to go a bit higher, and the rotors are getting a bit larger. And that's to capture more wind, create more efficiency. But the other thing that hasn't been mentioned in this kind of growth of turbines is that the growth of the megawatt capacity of those turbines has grown with that. And that's by design. It was very much by design, not by coincidence. And so if you have a 2 megawatt turbine that is a 500-foot turbine, and now you are able to go to, say, for example, a 600-foot turbine where you can go potentially to 4 megawatts, make the math easy. You go from a 2 megawatt turbine at 500 feet to a 4 megawatt turbine at 650 feet. The way the development's done is we develop to a certain number of megawatts, not a certain number of turbines. So if you say it's a 200 megawatt wind farm, you kind of do the math, that if you're using a 2 megawatt turbine versus a 4 megawatt, that's 100 feet taller, you put up 50% fewer turbines. So fewer turbines to look at, fewer turbines to emit sound, fewer turbines to have ice, blade potential issues, all these sorts of things. So, and then to address this concept of being a guinea pig, I think it's a very good comment to make. It's something to think about and to be very interested in. If we look at both kind of the United States and North America as well as globally, there are definitely 500 plus, 550 plus, 600 plus turbines installed, not just in the United States, and not just by our company Pattern, who's literally installing turbines of that size in Canada right now. This is a turbine that's not a prototype. These are fully designed, vetted, certified in the ways that are required by the wind industry. Installing these right now, I think 87 of them in Canada as we speak. And these are installed, if you start looking at other places, other countries, India, Australia, Europe, other places that are more land constrained, they want those higher megawatts and those taller turbines so they can install fewer of them. There's a lot more of these turbines installed across the globe. And it might be easy to say, well, that's not here, that's not in Illinois, or that's not in the Midwest. But the companies, General Electric, Siemens, Vestas, these are the three main companies in the wind industry that manufacture turbines. These are global companies by design with global engineering teams, global research teams, global operations teams that are able to take these learnings from these larger turbines and use the learnings from the ones that are a bit smaller, use the learnings from the ones that are operating and have been operating now and have a history, and roll all of that in to make sure that Ford County is not a guinea pig for this type of technology. So I want to make sure that gets put out into the room. And as well as the last comment I'll make about larger turbines, I don't know how much this has been discussed, but the concept of sound and the idea that, well, they're bigger, they're noisier. Not true. So the larger turbines and the larger rotors, a lot of the noise is a function of the tip speed of those blades, that whoosh sound that folks hear if you drive around near these turbines. And so tip speed, as you grow the rotor, naturally, that tip speed gets faster. And so what the manufacturers do is they slow the rotor down, the actual RPMs. They slow the rotor down to bring that tip speed back in line so that the noise profile, that sound profile, is the same as, or often even less than a smaller turbine. So wanted to try and stay focused on some of the facts and design criteria and some of these things. And I know it's a very emotional topic, but just from somebody who's led technology teams, led development, led a lot of different aspects of wind development, these are just some of those learnings. So probably went on longer than I thought, but we'll just again a thank you to not just the ZBA, the zoning subcommittee, and I'm sure the not too distant future the full county board, but maybe similar to Mr. Darnell, is to also extend a thank you to the folks that are actually in this room, and no matter what side of the aisle you're on, the folks that are paying attention and you're part of the process and you are trying to come and say your piece no matter where this lands. It is, I think it's something for everyone in this room, I'd be very sincere, to be very proud of in this day and age. There's too many people that ignore these sorts of things, think that it doesn't impact them, don't care, and don't bother to spend the time on these sorts of things. So regardless of who you are and what you feel, I think that's something that all of us can be proud of. So I'll end it there. Thank you very much.
Erwin Baker. Aaron. She knows all this stuff. I don't know. the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Thank you, ma'am.
Aaron Baker with Apex Clean Energy at 310 4th Street Northeast, Charlottesville, Virginia. I am a project manager for Apex Clean Energy. We are developing the Ford Ridge Wind Project here in Ford County in the Sibley and Gibson City areas. And I know that tonight you're considering many important potential impacts that this long-lasting industry may have on your county, everything from property values, decommissioning, noise, you name it. And I think that it is very important to deliberate those things carefully. And I'm glad that the county is taking the time to do that. And the good news is that you are not in any way creating a new wheel or being guinea pigs. This is an industry that has existed for 3 decades in its modern form in the US. And as was mentioned prior, you have 2 operating wind projects in this county. So, to put it colloquially, this is not your first rodeo. And so the things that you are already thoughtfully deliberating have been thought about very carefully by many people before you, and including in this county. As my industry colleague just said, this has been the zoning subcommittee of the board spent a very long time carefully going over every topic potential in the ordinance. So we're nearly a year in that process, and definitely over a year in what was intended to be a temporary moratorium on new wind permits in the county. What is currently being proposed by the zoning subcommittee and what's before you today is a proposal that in nearly all ways is much more restrictive than the prior ordinance, and is also more restrictive than any counties with wind, what the ordinances were at the time that the wind was built. And a lot of what brought us here today was issues with one of the wind developments in the northern part of the county. So this is a great opportunity to have some lessons learned, both from the industry advancements and what's been going on here. And I think that this is a welcome opportunity to do that. A lot of what's being talked about tonight is setbacks, which is the more juicy of the topic. And it's worth noting, however, that there was quite a lot of text in the ordinance, and all of it was covered very exhaustively and rigorously by the committee prior. The only 3 things in the ordinance that I would like to call out to you for change, because details are important, so the setback is very important, and I will touch on that as one of the 3 items, but just the language in and of itself is very important. So the first change that Apex Clean Energy recommends making is, I gave you this paper for your reference of what I'm going to refer to, but section 5.2 in the ordinance as proposed, we would recommend adding the phrase "if known" back into the application requirements for that topic that is referring to property owner names. That is in the phrase "if known" is in the original ordinance, but was stricken by the subcommittee as simply an editorial cleanup. It was just seen as extraneous, but there actually is a reason why it's in there, and that is because sometimes an applicant may, to the best of their knowledge, submit property owner information, but when you get into the title curative process, you find out that there were some discrepancies that need to be remedied, and we don't want that to make an application null and void. And the second requested change is, as Mr. Madsen referred to earlier, in section 5.7 of the special use permit application requirements. As what was discussed by the zoning subcommittee, this fee was intended to be a replacement of the original building permit fee that's in the full code. and it is not intended to be a new and separate special use permit application fee, which is how it is currently written. So again, that I think is just an editorial cleanup that is important, but relatively straightforward. And the final recommendation is, that is one of the more juicy topics, to the setbacks from primary structures. That is specifically section 6L1 of the proposed ordinance. We would recommend the setback from primary structures to be the greater of 1,500 feet or 3 times the turbine tip height. And the justification for this is that the overwhelming majority of projects that have been built in Illinois wind projects that have been built in Illinois counties have been to a standard of 1,000 or 1,200 feet from occupied residences or primary structures, as Ford County labels it. And again, that has been demonstrated by a vast amount of operational data to be safe and comfortable for residents. And so 1,500 feet or 3 times tip height is what is above and beyond that, obviously, and would make you a much more restrictive county without completely regulating out wind. And the current proposed setback of 2,250 feet from primary structures was, by all seeming accounts from having attended nearly every meeting of the zoning subcommittee, was just an arbitrary number that was thrown out at the last day, just before the vote, and did not really have any substance to back that number up. So whereas 1,500 did have more evidence for discussion. And I just want to remind people the property line setback has been discussed a lot, but there is a property line setback both in the original wind ordinance and also in the proposed. And the proposed wind ordinance is an increase to that property line setback to 1.25 times tip height, which is, again, greater than a majority of Illinois counties with wind. And just to bring things back into perspective, I want to underscore what my colleague Nikhil mentioned earlier of the Garadasan study that was completed. Garadasan is a subsidiary of DNVGL, which is a premier technical consultant which serves not just the wind industry, but oil and gas, maritime, energy, software, you name it. And their study calculated how far ice shed can travel from operating turbines. So this is not just a statistical analysis, but one that is rooted in operational data. And I just want to underscore these numbers. 1,000 feet from a house, and so a turbine 1,000 feet away would have the statistical risk of an ice shed strike once every 62,500 years. And that's a turbine 1,000 feet away from a home. And again, 1,000 feet, an individual ever present for 500 years, 1,000 feet from a turbine would have a risk of an ice strike every 500 years. And it is not, it is a very conservative study, obviously, because no individual will ever be ever present for that amount of time. So these numbers are pretty sobering when you start to put things into perspective. And the final note I'll say is that what some of the individuals here have proposed, all the while saying that they are not against wind energy, the proposed setback of 30 to 50 feet from a property line, well, 30,250 feet is a radius, as a radius is an area of 761 acres. So that's 1 point creates an area of 761 acres, which means that a person owning only a single acre can prohibit over a square mile of development. And obviously that number just gets larger and larger the bigger the property is. And so I think that makes it very clear that, especially from the comments here tonight, that the opposition to wind. They do not want, what they want is no impact to their property in any way. They want no change in any way, and they're asking you to zone that way. And that's just not a rational way to zone. That would mean odors, any shadow from a cloud passing over the sun or a passing truck could be considered obstructing their right to their property, and that is just not a way that any other industry is regulated. And so we would request that, and appreciate you taking these thoughts into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. The witching hour is getting mighty close, so I think that we will adjourn the meeting, consider moving it Thursday, October 25th, back here at the same location. But before we do that, I suppose I owe Phil an apology after he was willing to give up his time for later on. Sorry about that, but it's 11 o'clock and it's time to move out.
No apology necessary. I'm going to be here at the next hearing no matter what, so please.
Well, I hate it.
Please. Thank you. Thank you, but not necessary.
And also, we will pick up on the speakers. Jody will be the first one. Ted Hartke. Chris Hanford, Tom McQuinn. I'll keep this list, we'll try and go with that order. And like I say, give me a motion to, what was the date again? I'm sorry, the 25th of October. And the time, we may set it a little earlier in the evening. Oh, it does have to be the same time? We won't set it at a different time? It has to be at the same time, and that'll be at 7 p.m., October 25th. And it will be publicized, of course. Anything else? I need Okay, I would move, when we adjourn to Thursday, October 25th, back here in this courtroom. I need a second. Second. And I need a vote.
All in favor?
All right. Okay, the motion did carry. Next motion, I move we adjourn and go home.
I second the motion. All in favor?